second video podcast of the history of chocolate. This is Unit 2, Introduction to Chocolate and the Cacao Plant. The learning outcomes for this video podcast are: Number 1, understand the relationship between chocolate and cacao. Number 2, describe the steps to process the cacao plant. And number 3, define alkaloids and explain their relationship to chocolate and coffee. So what is chocolate exactly? The way we think of chocolate is as a solid, sugary confectionery, like a chocolate bar. But this isn't the way chocolate was for most of its history. In fact, for 90% of chocolate's history, it was a drink, and not just any drink, one that was bitter and cold. Its flavor would have been more akin to coffee than what we would associate as chocolate. It was only much later in its history that it was transformed into a sugary drink of the European elite, and then eventually, during the 19th century, was converted into a solid form, into the chocolate bar. Now, chocolate, of course, is derived from the cacao tree. The cacao tree is a native plant to Central America. That's where it was domesticated first by the ancient Mesoamericans. Its scientific name is Theobroma cacao. Theobroma literally means the food of the gods. And for ancient Mesoamericans, this was certainly true. Now, chocolate is made from the cacao bean pods. The pods grow directly off the trunk of the tree, which is unusual compared to European fruit trees, where the fruit tends to grow on the outer branches, such as apples, for instance. Inside these pods are cacao beans. Now, you can eat them raw, right off the tree. They have a very sweet, almost citrusy lemon or passion fruit flavor in and of themselves. But it takes several steps then to turn those beans into chocolate. The cacao plant is a very delicate plant. It only grows under the most specific of climatic conditions and requires constant heat and humidity. In fact, the entire world supply of cacao is grown in just a narrow band 20 degrees north and south of the equator. Everywhere where you see gray here is where cacao could theoretically be grown. There are 5 main steps to process cacao on its way to be made into chocolate. The first step is to just simply pluck the pods off the tree. They need to be cracked open, and the beans and pulp inside need to be scooped out. The next stage in the processing of cacao is called fermentation, and this usually takes about 5 days. Fermentation can be carried out in a variety of ways, but all the methods basically depend on scooping the beans and the pulp out from the pods, and then heaping them together to allow microorganisms to develop. Fermentation is a natural process whereby natural microorganisms such as yeast convert the sugar in cacao into acids and alcohol. It is in fact the same process that creates alcoholic drinks such as wine or beer. For example, wine begins as a sweet, sugary grape juice. Natural yeasts convert that sugar into alcohol, and in the process transform the juice into wine. A similar process happens with cacao. The sugary pulp surrounding the beans ferments into a boozy drink, about as strong as beer, 5 to 6% alcohol. The beans themselves undergo a transformation too. Many of the tannins which cause bitterness are removed, leaving the beans a much smoother and complex flavor. The fermentation process also does darken them up considerably. However, they will be even darker once they are roasted. After fermentation, according to traditional methods, the beans are spread out in the sun to dry. Once the beans are dry, they are roasted. Roasting accomplishes a number of things. It helps separate the outer husk from the inner bean and makes cracking them open and winnowing much easier. It also virtually sterilizes the cacao bean. This is rather important, as the conditions under which cacao beans are fermented are naturally full of bacteria, fungi, and molds. there is a small risk of infection from an unroasted cacao bean. Roasting reduces this risk. Various chemical reactions occur when the cocoa beans are roasted, and thus proper roasting is also integral to a good flavored chocolate. Finally, the beans are separated from the outer husk and the inner nib in a process called winnowing. The nib is the important part of making chocolate. Once the cacao is finished processing, we are left with the finished roasted cacao nibs, ready to be made into chocolate. Now, one of the reasons we probably like chocolate so much is because it contains an alkaloid. Alkaloids are naturally occurring plant products which exist in many different plants around the world. The alkaloid in cacao is called theobromine. Theobromine has a natural stimulating effect on the human nervous system. Many other alkaloids also have physiological effects on humans, and some are much stronger than others. There are many different alkaloids that you might have heard of. So theobromine is the alkaloid in cacao, but you're probably much more familiar with caffeine, which occurs naturally in coffee beans and the tea plant. You've also probably heard of nicotine, which occurs naturally in tobacco. Cocaine is an alkaloid which is derived from the cocoa plant. And morphine is an alkaloid which is derived from poppies and also produces heroin. All of these alkaloids have a physiological effect on humans. So chocolate is technically in the same category as heroin. Think about that the next time you're chowing down on a chocolate bar.